For over 10 years, we at Climate One have been engaging policymakers, influencers, entrepreneurs, and activists and scientists in broad, respectful, candid conversations about everything climate. Food, energy, water, technology, transportation, housing. We've had huge success bringing together people who think they're on opposite sides of issues. When they sit down and have a candid conversation, they often find common ground and the basis for real solutions. We're emotional beings. Thoughtful, inclusive conversations create the conditions in which the changes we want to see become possible. So I want to hear from you. When you talk about climate, how do you talk about it? More importantly, what do you want to be talking about? With whom? Join the conversation. Even make your own video. Invite your friends to join you. Let's talk climate. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see you here. We're going to start off with something we don't usually do here at Climate One. This is not business as usual today. So John Lanier, I invite you to channel your grandfather, Ray Anderson, and lead us in a voluntary pre-activity before we start the radio program.
Thanks, Greg. Please stand up. And this is how Ray would begin many of his talks. I invite you to turn to the people to your left and your right, perhaps behind or in front of you, and give them a hug.
I was going to do that anyway.
No.
Oh,
This is
the
a
easy
first.
one.
Yes, I know.
I don't usually hug my guests.
You should.
Maybe
I
it's
think from
after.
now
That's
on,
great. That's great.
this is a new huggy thing.
This is
That's
wonderful.
really good, actually. No one's going to want to stop hugging.
I know.
Now, when Ray would begin his talks that way, he would then say, "Greetings, fellow astronauts on spaceship Earth." So I'll share those words with you as well and remind you that when we connect with people in that way, we connect with the emotional part of who we are as people. And we're more open to receiving messages that touch on things like love and empathy. And that's why Ray would begin talks that way. We need those sorts of emotions and those thoughts to be open to the change that we need our society to make.
Thank you, John. If you haven't watched John's TED Talk, I encourage you to do that. So it's really worth watching. From the Commonwealth Club of California, this is Climate One, changing the conversation about energy, economy, and the environment. I'm Greg Dalton. In 2007, I went to the Arctic on a global warming expedition with scientists and journalists aboard an icebreaker. Experiencing climate change at the top of the world changed my life. And when I returned, I created Climate One here as a project of the Commonwealth Club. For the last 12 years, I've been interviewing leaders about how burning fossil fuels changes all of the systems around us, our food system, our water system, our ecosystems, our lifestyles, and our economy. Climate changes everything. Today, we're going to go in circles. The circular economy is mentioned a lot, but what does it really mean? And how is it related to biomimicry? We'll tackle those questions and also pay tribute to the beloved and legendary Ray Anderson, founder and CEO of Interface Inc., pioneering company in the realm of corporate sustainability. With us are John Lanier, co-author of the Mid-Course Correction Revisited, the story and legacy of a radical industrialist and his quest for authentic change. He's executive director of the Ray C. Anderson Foundation, founded by his late grandfather. Beth Rattner is executive director of the Biomimicry Institute, and Peter Templeton, president and CEO of the Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute, which certifies products made according to the Cradle to Cradle principles. Please give them a warm welcome at Climate One. Welcome to you all. John, let's begin with your grandfather was a captain of industry, and he had a moment where he realized he's a plunderer of the earth, a legal thief, and he wrote that someday people like me may be put in jail. So tell us about his spear in the chest moment.
Sure. Ray Anderson, for most of his professional life, up to his 60th year on planet Earth, was your typical businessman, just trying to make a high-quality product and make a buck. And he did that very well, growing Interface into the world's largest carpet tile manufacturing company, doing about $1 billion a year in sales in 1994. But that was the year when people began asking Interface a question. One of those people is in the room here today, John Picard. What is Interface doing for the environment? That question then made Ray open to reading a book. And the book was The Ecology of Commerce, written by Paul Hawken, that charged business and industry as the sector responsible for the greatest amount of environmental degradation, but the only sector large enough, well enough organized, and capitalized to fundamentally solve the environmental challenges that we have. Reading that book was an emotional experience for Ray. That was what he called his spear in the chest moment, when he realized he was this plunderer of the earth. And from that day forward, he was committed to making his business, Interface, a publicly traded industrial manufacturer, as environmentally sustainable as possible, so that he wouldn't have to be that plunderer, that legal thief that he referred to himself as.
And something very early on, and he wrote the book, the mid-course correction after that spear in the chest moment. And he wrote early in that book about crying openly when he learned about clearing of the Amazon to raise soybeans to feed to cows in Germany to create butter and cheese that would then pile up there in Germany, while people in Rio, in the favelas of Rio, were starving next to where those soybeans were grown. But so not many CEOs talk about crying in the first chapter of their business book.
He did. He was a remarkable individual. He could talk about the bottom line and the price to earnings ratio of the company and everything that Wall Street wanted to hear. But when it came down to it, he was motivated in this quest up Mount sustainability with the people of Interface out of a deep sense of love. And that love was for the people of Interface. That love was for all of the people he spoke to in the hundreds of speeches he would give a year in the mid-2000s. And importantly, that love was for the generations of people who have yet to walk planet Earth, because he understood what was at stake for real people when it comes to environmental work. It was easy for him to talk about what he found just fundamentally tragic and that moved him to such sorrow.
One day, senior executives of a major food company visited Interface to learn about their sustainability practices. Here's Ray Anderson retelling an encounter with one member of the visiting team.
One woman in the group, and she was head of global engineering. This woman did not want to be there. She did not understand why they would come to a carpet mill in Georgia, of all places, of all things, to learn about sustainability. What could they possibly learn from us? So she didn't want to be there, and she's skeptical about the whole thing. So the first half of the morning that they're together, she's obstructive and challenging everything. And then the mid-morning break comes, and to get to the ladies' room, she has to actually go through the factory. They're in this conference room out in the factory. So on her way to the ladies' room or back, I don't know who she encounters James Wisner, fork truck driver, on the factory floor with this big roll of carpet on this fork truck. And she stops him, and she says, "What do you do here?" Sort of in that tone of voice. And James, bless his heart, said, "Ma'am, I come to work every day to help save the earth." She was just stunned by that. So she started drawing him out. What do you mean, da-da-da-da-da. And finally, after a couple of minutes of it, he says, "Ma'am, I don't want to be rude, but if I don't get this roll of carpet to that machine in the next minute, our waste and emissions are going out of control. I've got to go." She came back to that meeting a visibly different person. She sat there very quietly, in total contrast the way she had been before. And then after a while, she started challenging her people. "Why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that?" And then she told the story of her encounter on the factory floor. And she said, "I've never seen anything like it." To demonstrate the alignment in a company from the very top of an organization clear to the factory floor. She says, "There's only one word I can think of that describes it, and it is love." Love on the factory floor.
That's Interface founder and former CEO Ray Anderson in a Natural Step online video. Beth Rattner, just your reaction seeing and hearing that.
Ah, that's so beautiful. Before I was Biomimicry Institute executive director, I was a management consultant, sustainability management consultant, and that is the dream story right there. That's what you want. When you work with the C-suite and you come in with a strategy plan, all you hope for is that it can trickle down at that kind of a level. So, and it's true, that's the most infusive way that you're ever going to keep your company going, because management changes.
Peter Templeton, tell us, we hear circular economy. What is that for people? That gets thrown around a lot. Some people here are deep practitioners of it. Some people maybe have trouble defining it. Help us understand, what is the circular economy?
The circular economy challenges us to look beyond the traditional take, make, waste approach of the linear economy as it exists today to overcome some of the challenges that Ray has talked about facing us as a society by looking at where the opportunities exist for us to recover those materials, to retain their value and repurpose and regenerate them into new products that can continue in perpetual cycles of use.
And the idea is that they're not less bad, right? The second generation should be better. It's not just like going down cycling, I think is the term, right?
Yes, we're looking to upcycle to find greater value in these products and materials through each use.
Beth Rattner, a lot of people are probably thinking about recycling, okay, but there's a bit of a recycling problem right now. Now that China has stopped accepting, China doesn't want to be the dumping ground. They want to be, first they've been the factory floor. They want to kind of move up the value chain. So what is that doing to recycling? Because it's kind of got a black eye these days because people aren't sure, is this really going where I think it's going to go?
It's a really important question, and I'm going to pivot a little bit on it only because there's so before I was biomimicry, after the management consulting and before biomimicry, I was with Cradle to Cradle for a number of years, and there's this fundamental recognition that we are making things out of the wrong other things, right? If you look at how nature makes everything, us included, it's mostly carbon, it's hydrogen, it's oxygen, it's nitrogen. That's the most abundant set of elements that exist. At the very, very bottom of that would be the trace elements, the aluminums, right? And so we can talk really, frankly, proudly about our aluminum recycling, but the truth is we should be looking at the more abundant set of elements. And that is when we start talking about pulling carbon out of the air, taking it from source emitters, pulling methane off of farms, and creating new kinds of stuff, new kinds of plastic, the way that New Light Technologies is doing with air carbon or Blue Planet is doing with concrete. That's the recycling story we should be telling. So
we should start, so back up and start using what are we making stuff out of?
What are we making stuff
Make it out of the abundant things, not the scarce things.
That's right.
And sounds like that would be cheaper if you're using something that's abundant rather than scarce, right?
It solves a couple problems, yeah. It solves a couple problems. Go ahead, John.
John Lanier.
I want to highlight something about the concept of recycling. It is considered this remarkable green practice, and it is. We should celebrate how far we've come in that space and mourn the fact that we've lost the ability to recycle plastics in China. But when you think about the circular economy, recycling is not the answer or the solution to advancing the circular economy. It's an answer, but actually one of the weakest ones. And I would point to the work of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, some of their thought leadership in this space, and the graphic that they use to depict all of the ways in which a circular economy would work. They show multiple loops. They're not the only ones who have shown this. Ray wrote his book originally and had similar graphics. But the number of loops are important because the tighter ones, things like reusing an item, that's a circular economy practice that keeps things at the highest value. Exactly.
The cycle's actually at the end. Reduce, reuse,
it's the last
recycle.
one. It's what we should do as a last result before we throw something in a landfill. So we have to be championing the more impactful circular economy solutions.
And so, Peter Templeton, what are companies doing to sort of step up and use better materials from the beginning that maybe don't need to be recycled? So take us back further upstream.
Well, and I want to add to this thread here and say that the starting point for us is always going to be safe materials. We want to be looking at safe and circular. So we are looking at the material health of those components to make sure that when we're perpetuating those materials, not only are they good for the health of the people and our planet, but they also have the maximum options for use in the future, because we know that they're not going to cause unintended harm or consequences. So that's a starting point for us. And what is really beautiful is seeing so many organizations that are rising to that occasion, seeing the opportunity that exists around this when they do take those steps to be able to continue to create value from their own products by reclaiming those products through cycles of use. And there are many different examples of that we see in products as services these days, when we look at just challenging our concepts of how things are delivered, like lighting with Philips Lighting Signify, now moving into a model where they're being able to provide lighting as a service to organizations so that they take on the responsibility for those materials through their life cycle. They maintain those light bulbs, those fixtures, and maintain a cycle through which they can reuse those and repurpose them beyond their immediate use. But the client benefits from that, from lower upfront costs, and of course, having the continued use of light throughout for its purpose.
So lighting as a service, you don't buy your bulbs, you rent them, someone comes to fix them, they take them back. I think Interface tried that with carpet early on, didn't work so well, they were ahead of the game.
They called it the evergreen lease, and that was the hope. Could Interface always own the carpet that they make and just lease it to people, put it in their facilities and maintain it, clean it, take it back at the end of its useful life and repurpose it then, recycle it into new carpet, keeping it in a closed loop manufacturing system. There are challenges, candidly, and Interface isn't able to utilize the evergreen lease, at least not now. I think they'd jump at the chance to start it back up. But some of those challenges are, how do you do the accounting for something like this? What are the depreciation schedules on a leased product compared to an owned product? And will the customer be willing to acquire the carpet from their operating budget for something that's leased when they've been used to using their capital budget to buy something and acquire it? If they're not willing to make that shift, then they're not even going to be open to it. And how do you compensate commission salespeople for something that they've leased as opposed to sold? It created challenges that weren't all able to be solved. It just shows we have more work to do.
Right, and some of that's happening these days. Peter Templeton.
Yeah, just to add on that, while that particular approach wasn't successful in its initial run, the carpet industry as a whole has stepped up and taken notice. And I think that that's what's important, is that we are seeing these leadership moves are inspiring others to look at where the solutions exist. And so the carpet industry has actually come together in many ways to look at how they can reclaim those products and continue to use those materials to create new carpet fiber, new carpet backing, and other materials collectively through reclaiming those materials across the board and working together in a way that's actually, I think, inspiring for many other sectors.
So let's get real specific about materials. Beth Rattner, walk us through a potato chip bag and tell us, there's so much packaging. In our house, we collect the snack bars and we take them back to the sports store because they think they're going to be recycled. Again, I came back to recycling, didn't I? But walk us through a potato chip bag and all the materials used in there.
Well, I have to credit Janine Benyus, who's in the room today, by the way. Janine has this beautiful quote, which is, imagine if everything we made was functionally indistinguishable from nature, right? That's the goal, because when you walk into a forest, that whole forest is working toward a single common good, which is the protection of the forest. That's its survival strategy. It's not going to take you out in the hopes that I'm going to win, only to find out that I'm going to need you later, right? And so the same is true for the potato chip bag. We've gotten to this place where we use a lot of different chemistry, all because we want to sell this particular bag of potato chips for this single use, and it's going to have one layer for protecting the oils, another for keeping air out, another one for the packaging on, the bright colors so you pick it off the shelf to begin with. But that's not how nature designs. It uses a very small, limited palette, but it uses structure to create very different functions. So once you have these different structures in place, now all of a sudden you can achieve amazing new capabilities. You can have bumps that shed water. You can have ridges that actually channel specific, bacteria or repel that bacteria. We can do things with structural color. We don't have to use pigments and dyes. We don't have to make our rivers the colors that they are in Asia by dumping 450,000 gallons of wastewater in there every day because we want to look good. It's all about rethinking that palette of materials and structure.
What's structural color?
What is structural color? By the way, we're going to get out of my depths. I was a lawyer and not a biologist.
So the
You
idea.
need to claim that up front. Not a chemist either. I got structural color, though, is fascinating. It's this idea that so prismatic color is hitting every surface all the time, and our eyes pick that up. It is canceling out every other color of the spectrum, let's say, except for blue. Right? So now I'm wearing blue, and the great thing about a structurally colored design fabric, Teijin, back 20 years ago, a company out of Japan, they created the first structural color fabric. It was a little shiny, though, and disco didn't take off the way it was supposed to. So unfortunately, people stopped buying that. But there's a new group now that is looking to the blue tarantula for very even blue color. Now, all of a sudden, we could have blue jeans that don't toxify the water supply. When water becomes what oil is, we're going to wish we made our clothes really differently.
Peter Templeton, the clothing industry is an area where there's a lot of fast fashion, there's a lot of waste. Is it an area of really tremendous waste, or is it an area of tremendous progress?
Well, it's definitely an area that requires tremendous attention because the production coming out of the fashion industry has doubled in just a century because of fast fashion and other moves. So it is something that we're always looking to propel greater innovation forward in that arena to be able to identify where these opportunities are. And so it's one of the areas where we've seen a lot of leadership taking place with different suppliers, manufacturers, retailers, and others that are trying to position themselves for these opportunities. And from some of the examples that have been given here with fabrics like denim, which do have tremendous impacts that most consumers who go out wearing jeans every day don't even think about the water that's consumed, the impact of the dyes associated with denim. And these are areas where we're really excited about the innovations that we've seen come forward through some of the Cradle certified materials that now exist, particularly in denim and other spaces. And to see those innovations now having the opportunity in the market is really encouraging for us because it reduces the impacts related with that manufacturing cycle, which are tremendous across the board with water and energy and climate. But it also opens up new opportunities for how we reuse those materials in the future because they are safer materials for us to work with, and there are other opportunities for us to re-engage them in second use for fashion, as well as for other additional purposes, insulation, fiber fill, et cetera.
Which I should mention that the insulation in the walls here are repurposed Levi's, and the wood paneling here is remilled wood from this warehouse, which was his previous facility. So we're insulated by old blue jeans right now. John Lanier, tell us about how the carpet glue and the problem with that was, and the solution from nature that was found.
Oh, this is one of the best stories from the annals of interface. Before I tell the story, I want to make a really strong point about something we've all heard about that then this is a great example of. What is the triple bottom line? We hear it all the time. People say people, planet, profit, or economy, equity, and environment. And ultimately, they mean businesses being concerned about multiple things, not just their profitability. There's a weak form of the triple bottom line, and it's where people, companies, will do a side project in the environmental space here or in the social space there, and they'll fund that from the profitability of their core product that is unfortunately harmful. So you're siphoning off some of the profits to subsidize this. That's weak triple bottom line thinking. Interface always was committed to a strong form of triple bottom line thinking. It's not about some of each, it's about more of all. Can you create your business in such a way where as you change your product to be less harmful and to do social good, you unlock new business opportunities? So that's a true triple bottom line example. And that's what we have here. So Interface in the mid-2000s, was trying to design glue out of the installation of carpet. You want carpet tile to stay where it is. The old way was you slathered glue on the floor and stuck the carpet down. That's fine. The problem, though, was that the glue would off-gas volatile organic compounds. And so utilizing a team from the biomimicry consultancy that Janine started, Interface was looking to nature. How would nature adhere? That was the question that they were asking. They looked to the gecko that's able to climb walls and even hang upside down. And the gecko uses van der Waals forces, tiny little hairs on its finger pads that would molecularly attract to the surface. Interface couldn't manufacture van der Waals forces. So they instead said, well, what other natural forces are there? that are out there. And they quickly hit upon gravity. Gravity is really good at making things adhere in one direction. Fortunately, it's the direction we want carpet to go, down. So they said, well, what if we linked carpet tiles together as one big carpet and let gravity hold it down? And so they innovated something called tactiles, these small squares of single-sided adhesive stickers that you put on the underside of carpet. Here's where that strong triple bottom line piece comes back in. The squares that they invented don't off-gas. So there's your social good. And your environmental good is less material that's used. All that glue is obviated. You don't need it anymore. Here's that triple bottom line piece on the strong side. It unlocked a portion of the residential market that hadn't been accessible, because now interface carpet could be an area rug in the residential space, because you can use these tactiles to make your own 5x5 grid of carpet tile for your home. And that was unexpected. They tried to innovate the glue out for different reasons than driving revenue, and it ended up that they were able to drive revenue anyways.
Interesting lesson from nature. Beth Rattner, we've heard a lot recently about the extinction crisis and the number of species going extinct. So what's at risk there for some species out there that's perhaps going to go extinct that might be the next, that we could learn something from, not to mention the fact that the interdependence of all biodiversity. But tell us about what your view on that extinction crisis, because it's getting a lot of attention right now.
It's so devastating. There's so many reasons to have your heart broken over this topic, but I think from the egotistical, we're capitalists, we want to make more stuff perspective, we should be actually downright scared. There is a little organism called the springtail. It is probably not in danger of currently going extinct, but if you saw it, you would absolutely want to extinguish it. And it's a little blue organism. It's often found in marine environments. And when you type in springtail into Google, you will see exterminator options coming up. This little guy holds the key to about a $23 billion market in fashion, about a $54 billion market in auto, and probably a $110 billion market in semiconductors, because it knows how to repel oils and water and everything else. It's very uncommon to be able to find oleophobic surfaces in nature, but it has this very specific sort of mushroom-headed structure. And so when the oil or the water, it's got tiny hairs in addition, but it also, because of that mushroom structure, it's not going to wet the core surface. So if you're thinking about going to a concert and everyone's got their hands up in the air and they're tossing that balloon around or the beach ball around, it's the same idea. That molecule of oil, that molecule of water isn't wetting the surface. Now all of a sudden you have a massive water and oil repellent solution. So before we go extinguishing things, before we go calling the exterminator, or worse, before our climate takes out some of our best teachers, we should be thinking ahead.
There's also another example that you talk about, Beth, which is there's a professor at Stanford that's shaping wind farms using lessons from fish, a good example of biomimicry.
Vortices. This is John Debery, a really great story also that Janine tells. And what I love about this one is, so for climate, because we're at Climate One, Project Drawdown, which is a phenomenal resource, talks about moving wind from 4% to 22% by 2050, right? It's going to cost about $1.2 trillion to do that. That's a lot of capital, but what if we could actually do this in a biomimetic way? So the way that schools of fish work, the very first fish is out there and he's swimming, his little tail's going, and then the guy behind him doesn't have to swim quite so hard. So that vortices that are cast means that you have a much higher rate of efficiency of energy. So John Debery out of Stanford took his vertical wind turbines and grouped them like the school of fish. He was able to get 5 to 10x the output of energy just because when that first wind turbine started to turn, so did the guy behind it. Mm-hmm. So we can spend $1.2 trillion, and we should, on new wind farms, but we could maybe spend less, have fewer of them, which has, of course, a land impact anyway, all because we're looking to biomimetic models.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about biomimicry and circular economy at Climate One with John Lanier, co-author of A Mid-Course Correction Revisited, the story and legacy of a radical industrialist and his quest for authentic change, and Beth Rattner, executive director of the Biomimicry Institute, which promotes innovation inspired by nature, and Peter Templeton, CEO of Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute. Peter, let's talk about some of the big drivers behind this. Walmart's done a lot on packaging. Are they still doing that? You know, they can do a lot of things at scale. Walmart cracks the whip. Companies in the supply chain have to fall in line. Is that still a big driver, or have they kind of plateaued out all of the savings on packaging and other things they can get?
No, I don't think we're anywhere near plateauing on the savings that's possible, and certainly the need for it. And I think this is cutting across, again, retailers and entire consumer markets at this point, and looking where those opportunities exist, both in terms of opportunities to optimize the products to consumers, as well as the packaging associated with them, and then, of course, the larger systems that deliver them. When we're looking at the suppliers themselves, distribution, and the opportunities to reclaim some of those materials. And again, this is another area where we're seeing a lot of innovators that are stepping forward to be able to present different cases of their own success. We have, folks obviously that you've talked to before, like The Method, where they've brought together consumer products for their personal care items, where they've looked at opportunities for them to reclaim plastics from beaches in Hawaii, bring them into their process for delivering better packaging for their products, which are also healthier and safer products as well. But we see that also being followed by other groups like L'Oreal and more mainstream groups that we're really excited to see them looking not only at how their products that have earned cradle-to-cradle certification are delivered, but also the packaging behind them. And they're now engaging in broader initiatives around the packaging for those materials with Nestle Water, with Pepsi Cola, and others to look at how they actually reclaim those materials and make better packaging for their collective set of consumer products that they deliver.
Well, I think if Method was really serious, they wouldn't sell all their soap in plastic bottles, but there's other ways to package soap or have a bar of soap. But Beth Rattner, that point about, plastic bottles made into clothing. I remember one time I bought a shirt made from recycled plastic bottles, and then I talked to one of your former colleagues, Bridget Luther, and she's like, "Ew, I wouldn't put that on my body."
That sounds like Bridget, actually.
Yeah, but with the southern accent. But where's that going in terms of plastic bottles? If they're not going to be upcycled, they're not going to be made into clothing. We're a lot of tension these days. Plastics in the ocean. We're just drowning in plastic bottles.
We are drowning in plastic bottles, and more plastic than fish. Right, by 2050 is the current number that's being talked about. I have so many different ways I want to answer that question, and I'm not sure which way to go. So part of me wants to say, look, there are strategies. The thing about how nature operates is, number one, is all spent on avoidance. We shouldn't have gotten ourselves into the problem to begin with. And like the structural color example is a really good way. Well, let's not think about how we're going to clean up the rivers. Let's talk about how we're not going to keep polluting the rivers to begin with. Then you've got to optimize the stuff you do have, the water that you have, the energy that you have, and then there's the sequestration and the repair. So you're asking me a repair question. And really what we have to do is we have to actually emulate the different processes for how nature collects nutrients of all kind. So actually, Mikhail Davis out of Interface said, every ship that's out there currently in the ocean should probably play its part in dragging the nets behind it. There's a secondary use for commercial nets, and I'd love for you to talk about that as well. But we have to think about this as we're all in this together. We can't. Employer responsibility for pollutants would be a phenomenal thing, but right now we're all experiencing the impacts of it anyway. So why don't we design solutions where we can all help the problem? And so I feel like that's the biggest answer for biomimicry out of the question, the way that you're asking for me, is how are we all going to play a role in this cooperation? We all contributed to it. So what's the cooperation model that we should be following?
Yeah, well, take your cup to Starbucks or walk around with your water bottle. But plastics get bashed a lot. But Beth Rattner, don't they also have some positive attributes in terms of how the molecules stay together over cycles?
I can tell you the exciting thing for me about plastics is, I'm going to go back to air carbon for a second, that new light. So this idea that we can actually be taking carbon and using a biocatalyst, right? So you're taking things that was about to become greenhouse gases, and we're capturing it into a reactor. Then we're using a biocatalyst. I'm not doing any of it. They use a biocatalyst, then they separate out the carbon, and then they repolymerize it. Now you've got a thermoplastic that is going to be biodegradable. That is the future of plastic that we should be talking about. We should spend all of our time thinking about how carbon can be reused as a building block for our stuff.
And John Lanier, I think Interface may have a carbon negative carpet. So the idea of carbon right now is kind of this waste product that's put out there for no charge. So talk about rethinking carbon as an input that's actually valued in industrial production.
Sure. Yeah. Interface, and this was true to Ray Anderson's original vision, never just wanted to do no harm, which is perhaps the best definition of sustainable that you can have. They always envisioned more. Becoming a regenerative enterprise. What would it look like for a company just because it operated, just because it did what it did? What if that made the world more just, more environmentally safe? Interface takes that very seriously, and so their Climate Take Back initiative is true to that vision that Ray Anderson laid out. Could Interface help reverse global warming through its operations? Well, yes, they can transform their enterprise to do that. And perhaps one of the most important ways that they can do so is to look at what they produce and ask the question, can we sequester carbon in what we make? They challenge their R&D team to revisit the carpet tile that they've made for a long time. Can enough bio-based material be added to Interface carpets where there's no loss on performance, but the carpet actually has a negative carbon footprint? And the R&D team came back and said, yeah, we got your answer. The company is now working to commercialize that, scale it, and they've already made a commitment that all products sold today around the world has no carbon footprint because of offsets. There's a carbon neutral pledge. Ideally, in the coming years, Interface will be able to honor that pledge without having to purchase a single offset to do so.
And you also think that this is a symbol of how capitalism needs to be kind of evolve and change, where shareholders value this kind of thing. Because right now, carbon is emitted for free. The air is a free sewer, John. So how does your vision for capitalism being revised, reformed, so that it is more sustainable?
Evolved. I would say it needs to evolve. That's a big question. I could take it a lot of directions as well. How about I take it this direction? Can we ask our global economic system to do multiple things at once? The very valid defense of our current economic system, call it capitalism, call it neoliberal economics, the very valid defense of it is that it has created more human well-being than any economic system that has been tried since the dawn of humanity. And that's true, it has. Can we ask our economic system to do that, to continue doing that, to not stop improving quality of life around the world, while it also shifts in such a way that it solves our environmental challenges? That's what we should be asking capitalism, neoliberal economics to evolve into. And one of the most important ways that that can happen is if individual actors within the system look for the opportunity to have a strong triple bottom line impact. I don't think there are any two issues that can be opportunities bigger than resource scarcity, and the circular economy is the answer there, and global warming, climate change. Those are the two big issues that are going to define what happens to our economic system when you look out over the next 80 years, when you look at the rest of the 21st century. Can we respond to these challenges and turn them into opportunities? Companies like Interface, and there are others, are working to do that.
We're talking about the circular economy at Climate One with John Lanier, Beth Rattner, and Peter Templeton. We're going to go to a quick lightning round. We're just going to mention a noun and get you your first unfiltered thoughts when I mention something for our guest today. So starting with Beth Rattner, what comes to mind when I say Patagonia?
Salamander. Patagonia is phenomenal. They're such a leader in this space because they understand two important things. They understand that nature can inspire, not just for you to use it and go outside, but it can also be the greatest teacher. We were able to do a project together with them as well.
Peter Templeton, what comes to mind when I say paper straws?
Ooh. Small steps.
John Lanier, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp.
Ooh. No, opportunity. Goodness, if we can see the political leadership in the American South, not just Governor Kemp, but many elected leaders become committed to the environmental and social change that we need to see happen, then we'll see more of that change. So I would say he's an opportunity to do really good things.
Even if he got there by some questionable means. Peter Templeton, Amazon.
Ooh. Which proper noun are we referring to here?
They go with the forest.
Yeah. That is my natural inclination, always to go with the forest. So this is, so again, many places I can go with this, but this is, again, to the point that John was just making. So much opportunity exists in that space. And we know where, the economy is moving. They're in a tremendous position of influence, and we want to encourage them to take every step to lead.
And also their employees are starting to push them in a
Yes.
way that hasn't happened before internally, because they were not a leader on clean energy and other things. Beth Rattner, what comes to mind when I say hamburger grown in a laboratory that is not ground up cow? Lab
Am I getting the harder ones, or
Lab
just
meat.
my imagination?
Yeah.
Gosh. I can say my first word is actually surprise, and it's not about just the petri dish of the future of cattle, but also the fact that I recently happened to learn that someone did a projection a couple hundred years out around rotational grazing versus petri dish beef. And the answer was actually that petri dish beef it outperforms in the early stages. It does not obviously use nearly as much, does not emit nearly the greenhouse gas, but over time, it actually is far, far worse. And I need to be able to cite that study with a little bit more authority, but either way it's provocative, which is we make decisions all the time that we know just a little bit about. And I think that that's really dangerous. The reason why we look to nature and biomimicry is because it's been tested over a long time, right? This is a millennium that we're talking about, and we need to be a little bit more humble before we go thinking that we can disrupt how a cow works.
Last one, John Lanier, what comes to mind when I say hugs?
See, very easy question.
My son, I hug him every day. My wife, my daughter. Ray was motivated by tomorrow's child, the people that are going to inherit this world. We get to choose what world they inherit, and I'll probably never meet my great-great-great-great-granddaughter, but I'd love to give her a hug.
Aw.
Let's give them a round for it. Anything that allowed me. Beth Rattner, you talk in one of your videos about humility and how confronting nature requires some humility. So tell us what you mean by that. When you look at humility, look at nature, how it requires us to be humble.
Well, again, it's such an honor to be able to work with Janine Benyus, who literally has been humbled by nature her whole life and has been able to share that with us, and then we in turn get to pass that on to the next generation. There is so much chemistry that happens in nature. There is so much intense, sophisticated design that, again, back to that springtail that you would want to squish, or the scarab beetle, which is, have you ever seen the ones that are silver or gold or brightly colored green, almost metallic looking? That's 5 microns thick. Right. It's super, super thin. And it is, and again, the average person, even my adorable nieces, are scared of bugs. They're scared of spiders. But we've been able to turn that around for them because we talk about all that they can accomplish. The tensile strength of the spider web itself. Like I said, the vibrant colors that are produced on the beetle from those tiny, tiny layers of chitin. By the way, 5 microns is like 1/10 of your human hair. We're talking about a very thin layer that's able to just generate immensely gorgeous colors. how can you not be humbled by that? How can you not look at how nature makes something so beautiful and so small, and then what we do when we're trying to make color ourselves or structures ourselves?
John Lanier, you talk about how a lot of the language around climate change is militaristic and the war on warming, that sort of thing. Why do you think that's the wrong kind of language?
I have to give a hat tip to Paul Hawken. He's the first person who put this on my radar. We have, and this is not just around climate, it's so many environmental and social causes. We get our language wrong. Why do we talk about a war on this and arming ourselves for that? We want to create change. Sure, you can, beat somebody over the head if you want to create change. I don't choose that option first or second or third or fourth. I want to inspire a person. I want to work with them. I want to collaborate. There's a word. You can learn from nature on collaboration so much. And it's not to be taken lightly, because the words that we use, the language that we use matters. It reflects our approach to something, our mindset. And if I see somebody as an enemy, they will probably notice that and treat me the same. If I see them as a potential collaborator, they'll notice that and hopefully treat me the same. We need to be very mindful of language that we use to create the change that we want to see in this world.
Koch brothers will do business with anyone who agrees with them on one issue. They don't villainize. They're very pragmatic. They will do business with you. Agree with them on one issue, whereas they're often vilified. Like a lot of people would never talk to them, but they'll talk to you if you agree with them on one issue. Beth Rattner, one thing we've been talking about here at Climate One is the need for a positive vision, the future. We see rising seas. We're going to change the waterfront. The waterfront has basically been the same place for most of human history. That's going to change. It is changing. Right. And people have a hard time visioning that. So how can nature, how can your institute help us create this positive image of the future that we need to design and create inspired by nature?
Thanks for that question. Actually, it's a great opportunity for me to point out that John and I know each other also because the Ray C. Anderson Foundation helps support something called the Ray of Hope Prize. And this is a design challenge that is global. We open it up to anybody, anywhere. We get hundreds of submissions every year through this process. And it is hope in action. If you're feeling down one day, I want you to go on the website and look at who comes through the door on this process. They're able to see something, I think, depending upon... Sorry, let me start with that again. You're able to see the solutions of where you are. So we are getting teams from Iran, we're getting teams from Norway, we're getting teams from Long Beach. It's amazing to watch. The competition has been so successful that actually we had high school kids who wanted to enter too. And then we had middle school kids who wanted to enter too. And we kept thinking, well, how are we going to get that middle school kid to compete with somebody who's going to really become an entrepreneur and launch their own business? And we realized that we're now dividing these up. Kids take to this like that. They instantly want to go outside. They want to study the ant. They want to understand why the hairs on the Saharan silver ant actually reflect the heat. And then this one group of middle school kids created a tile for the roof that mimics that same sort of innovation. We're seeing that all the way through. The winner from last year was a team out of Brazil that is looking to reforest. A lot of reforestation efforts fail. But if we were successful, we could take every car. It would be the equivalent of taking every car off the road, right? We could keep every car on the road if we would just replant our forests. That's about 7 billion tons of carbon every year that we could be sequestering. But right now, you go up to the forest and you plant your tree. And again, you say, good luck, little tree. And you leave. And unfortunately, the grasses will get them in Brazil. Insufficient amounts of water. The leafcutter ants will attack it. So this team looked to the bromeliad plant, which is like the top of a pineapple, how it collects water, and it put down a larger surface so that the grasses can't get in, and the ants don't like to climb upside down, so they don't get into the tree as well. Now we have a solution that's going to plant 250 million trees over the next 5 years because somebody was curious enough to say, it's not working. We want to see something else happen. And the Ray of Hope Prize went to that team, and now they're scaling.
Great. Peter Templeton, what's the world look like if, cradle to cradle? What's the vision of, what's manufacturing consumption look like? And should we really address the underlying driver of consumption itself rather than trying to just make better products?
Absolutely. We're both part of the equation. I mean, in our philosophy of cradle to cradle and circular economy, we're looking to make sure that we're taking a very pragmatic view. We are working towards, or moving towards a planet of 10 billion people plus. And we have to look at what is going to be required to support and sustain quality of life when, within the next 10 years or so, our middle class is now going to double in size to over 5 billion people. So we want to make sure that we're not looking at this from a perspective of scarcity, we're looking at a perspective of abundance. To the points that have been discussed here before, there's the opportunity for us to do more good, not just less bad. And so if we do embrace these concepts, which each of us have been talking about, taking them and showing that they are real, these are innovations that can be put into practice and scaled, then we do have the opportunity to grow and prosper in this space. And I do want this to be a very positive message. It isn't all the negative focus on it, because we do have the opportunity to reclaim those resources, to maintain and continue to show their value in different ways through the creative approaches that we can all explore together.
Can I
Sure.
follow on that? I wanted to make sure that for people here and watching online, that the concept of embodied energy was discussed, because it's a part of this future and the opportunity piece. There's some surprising solutions that we have at the intersection of circular economy and climate change. This chair, if you look at this chair, what do you see? You probably see white leather and metal framing. I do too. I also see energy and water. Actually, you can have embodied water too. All of the energy that went into extracting the materials, or if this is real leather, to feeding the cow that it came from, all of the energy to put it together, all of the energy to ship it and eventually get it right here on this stage, that is locked inside of this thing. And if I took this chair and we went wrestling style and I smashed it on the ground, broke it, we'd have to go get a new chair. And we'd have to extract the material, use the energy to make the new chair, and get it to this spot and put it here. If I don't smash the chair, this thing stays right here and the next person can sit in it. So if we keep things in use, their highest value, as long as possible, perhaps one of the greatest solutions in the circular economy space, we preserve the energy, therefore the carbon, where it is. We don't have to go and make that next thing and use more energy to do so. So this vision for the future, we become owners of things. This is Patagonia's words and Yvon Chouinard's, owners of things, not consumers of them. That's a big and radical shift in this full system, and something that I know resonates with the folks at Cradle to Cradle.
Absolutely.
And there's so much pressure, the company pressure though, John Lanier, is quarterly growth and profits. Apple is in trouble because they're not selling enough iPhones. They want us to turn that iPhone in, and maybe they'll recycle it, and maybe you believe that. But there's so much pressure to buy new things, that's so much overwhelming of individual virtue.
Absolutely. It's the problem of short-term thinking. It's well understood, and nobody has a great solution for it, except for maybe the folks over at Unilever and Paul Pullman saying, yeah, I'm not giving you quarterly earnings reports. So there's some good news from some sectors, but it's still the overwhelming paradigm is people want the short-term benefit. And we can't think that way. Like we're in big trouble if we continue to think that way. So how does it change? I think it changes, sure, you need shareholders to change the way that they think about return on investment. You also need consumers to change the way that they think about consuming or owning something. You need employees to demand more from the companies that they work for. We need so much leverage brought to bear on these fundamental flaws in our system, short-term thinking being one of the biggest of them, for those aspects of the system to move. And so it's really going to have to come from a lot of places.
Peter Templeton.
But I want to make sure that folks don't take away the message that this is, an economic loss. When we're talking about embracing these concepts, again, it's all about opportunity. And McKinsey and Ellen MacArthur Foundation have done some great work on this and trying to quantify, the potential here and looking at 1.8 billion euros that can be added to the European economy over the next 10 years by embracing circular economy concepts. There really are, trillion. I think there are tremendous opportunities for us to leverage, as John has pointed out, with individual products and materials. If we do look at this, it does does require us to think at things differently. It does require us to engage all players, so we're coming at it from a policy and industry and consumer perspective. But it's definitely a net gain for all of us if we embrace it fully.
We're going to go to audience questions for John Lanier, Beth Rattner, and Peter Templeton. Invite you to go up to the microphone and join us with one part comment or question. And yes, sir. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Gil Friend from Natural Logic. Thank you all for the inspiration and learning every time. I've learned so much from Ray over the years, and I'm really delighted to be here with you. Many of us in the room have been, like you, working with companies to try to move these ideas forward, and we find that we're stuck, despite the trillions of dollars of opportunity, at two key sticking points. One is that people still seem to believe that you either make money or you make sense, and you can't do both. And the other is that people seem to think that it's life in service of business instead of business in service of life. We just saw this week Mike Pompeo saying, Arctic melting, great, more sea lanes. So there's a profound disconnect with the view of the world that you're all describing. What have you found to be the most powerful seeds that open up someone's mind or shift someone's thinking or that generate the, wow, I never thought of it that way before?
Who'd like to tackle that?
I'll go first. Microscopy is my answer. Obviously. The reason I say that is because I have met so many people who may not understand the environmental implications, they may not care about the social implications, but man, do they like invention? Do they like to innovate? And when you start to show what something looks like, let's go back to that beetle, looking like at the 5 microns. If you start to show with microscopic images what life looks like in the small nanoscales, there's a sense of wonder because everyone used to be a child. That gets reignited. And so maybe we can't get to them through guilt or even financial opportunity, but you can get to them through wonder.
Let's go to our next question. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to know what the three of you thought about all the good news that's out there. I keep saying this I know you, so I keep saying this to you, but I find that I am having trouble keeping up with all of the innovations in the papers and on the web, all of the good stuff happening all over the world. Hi, Jeanine. And I don't even have time to look at the bad news. And so my question is, how do you see all of the people, like the ones in this room, who are already convinced but are a bit overwhelmed and need a way to organize the information because we don't want to keep hearing about new surprises? Where do we go for this? It doesn't seem to be Google. I mean, we love Google, but how do we organize this information so that we don't find businesses reinventing the wheel or struggling? What are your solutions to that?
Thank you for raising that point. First, just to build on what Beth had said, and she'll use the word wonder, I'll use the word magic, because I do see it happening every day, and the innovation that's absolutely happening. And that's what inspires me and inspires so many others that have come to the table to look at what they can do, because they are very solutions-oriented. And I think it's finding the avenues to share those stories. There are a lot of great examples that we're seeing where that innovation is being picked up from one sector or one industry and transferred into others. Right now, I think at the leadership end of this, there is a great sense of willingness to share because folks are so proud of what they're able to demonstrate, particularly around these enormous challenges like climate change, where folks want to be able to say, look what we're able to do now. And that's where I think our three organizations, as well as many of those in the room, are able to leverage that most effectively and share across our different communities.
I would just add to Lisa's question that we have a website called asknature.org. It's got a couple thousand strategies and innovative ideas. Again, if you're having a bad day, just go explore, because that sense of magic and wonder is really evident when you start to just type in a question like, how does nature filter? How does nature adhere? Something really basic. You'll start to see a lot of good news, not just in terms of how nature already handles it, but some of the inspired ideas that are coming out of labs and companies all around the world.
Welcome.
I am so thrilled to be here with some of my heroes. So I just want to acknowledge all the people who are here, Jeanine and Cradle to Cradle. my question was similar to the first person, is like, how do we make people fall in love and act now? And how do we start from the top down? I've been an environmental activist since I was in my teens, and just the slowness of change. And right now it feels like we have to move really fast. And industry, yes, and grassroots up, but how do we pressure the top? And industry can do that. How do we pressure that to get some changes in policies that will support all these radical changes?
To the first piece, well, actually to the second piece, I'd say we need leverage at every space, top down, bottom up, middle out, all of it. It's necessary for the speed of change. And now I'll tie it to the first piece. How do we get people to care, is how I'm going to phrase your question. And I think the most important thing that we can do is to invite them to imagine better than we currently have. If they think that what we've got is great, status quo is a powerful opiate, is what my grandfather would often say. We have to give them something better. And fortunately, we have that. Because let's be optimistic, when we reverse global warming, when we stabilize the climate, however long it may take, imagine what that world looks like. I can say with confidence that it's a world where energy is ultra low cost and available to everyone. It's a world where gender equity has spread throughout the world. It's a world where we have healthier functioning food systems and positive human health outcomes that come from that. It's a world where we're stitched together in community. I can make that case time and time again that the technologies that have scaled to reverse global warming will allow us to embrace each other in more meaningful ways. I want that world for my children, regardless of a coming climate catastrophe. You can set that aside. I still want to do the work that builds that world. And if we're so diligent about reminding people of the opportunity of what that world looks like if we get it right, yes, tell them how bad it will get if we don't, but more the optimism and the positivity. That's, I think, how you reach people.
I have a question. Do you know what caused Ray to pick up the book, the Paul Hawkins book?
Serendipity and a few committed people. So it was the potential to lose revenue that caused the company to first say we need an environmental vision. And so Ray was not wanting to lose revenue. This is where John Picard comes into this story. So he was looking for inspiration to answer the question, what's your environmental vision for Interface? And an employee had just received the book, The Ecology of Commerce, from her daughter, who had seen Paul Hawkins speak. And this daughter said to her mother, you need to get this book in the hands of your boss. Mm. And so the book was placed on his desk, and he picked it up. And oh, how things have changed. It's that simple, but it really required a few people in the right place at the right time with the right hearts to cause my grandfather's world to fundamentally transform.
Trusted messengers can do a lot. Often the times that there's a lot of stories about how daughters have influenced their influential fathers. Let's go to our next question.
So I love what you've all created here and some of the specifics. And I'm looking at what you said, John, about ownership. And I have a line mindset, which is rather than consuming, what would it look like for all of us to be investors, because we have one earth. Mm-hmm. And how you're talking about bridging all these things together. And so it's really all of us with business and all those collaborations. I mean, do you have something, any one of you, that have an example of that? And if you can also comment on what you see, what it would look like in the generosity economy, where we actually take out money as a system and put in other things that we all agree to for value. Thank you.
Burning Man. Who wants to take that one?
Do you want to go first?
Please.
Beth Rattner.
The concept of investing happens as soon as you care, to use a word that's come up a lot on stage today. And if we start to when we start to have local economies that produce the same kind of services that we're currently used to getting from centralized services, from large multinational corporations, when we start to have those local economies start to take place and we start to care a lot more about the circulation of money and we see where it's going, we see where, places that used to be barren land are getting restored, where I'm growing my food, those visible pieces of connection are the things that change the fastest. And you don't even have to have a lot of them. You can just have a few beacons and everybody sees them, they get inspired, they want to live there. I think that the very simplest level, that's where we have to begin, is we have to begin with investing in our place. Janine likes to say we have to come home. We're a species who realizes that we've been traveling around a lot. We're all indigenous to somewhere. So we have to come home to that and we have to invest first in place. And that includes, by the way, looking at the organisms that have thrived there, the plants, the animals, those insects. Once we understand them more deeply, those are our cues. Those are our biological blueprints of where we need to go.
The whole idea of slow money, kind of investing where you live, but bring your capital back home. Let's go to our last question. Welcome.
Thank you, Tom Lent. We've got a big opportunity, I think, in the next 18 months or so, whatever it is, with the presidential and all the other elections coming up. And a growing interest in getting climate into that discussion. If you had the ear of of either one of the candidates, congressional or presidential, or one of their policy people, and to talk about what they could most do that would help encourage the nature-inspired innovation by many that all of you are about, as opposed to just a government mandate of some sort. What policies would you suggest that they bring, policies and approaches would they bring to those debates?
Thank you. We'd like to tackle that.
All right.
John Lanier.
First of all, you have to acknowledge who Tom Lent is.
Yes, absolutely. I think we need to understand what every sector's role in the system is. And we all probably have disagreements on what government should do. We also probably all have agreements on a few things that government should do, like building roads. I mean, you can find common ground in this respect. I'd like to see two things happen. One of them is the regulation you tried to set aside, and I'm not going to let you, and I'll deal with that one first. The most important thing that we can see on the issue of climate is an appropriate price on carbon, because right now there is a fundamental inefficiency in our global markets because the harm that comes from global warming is not priced into it. And so to increase the efficiency of our markets, we need to put an artificial price on carbon. Conservatives agree with this if they're economically minded. So that's, I think, the most important one thing that government can do. I would say then that to more appropriately answer your question, the direction you wanted us to go. We need our elected leaders to listen a lot more than they are now. Listen to what's going wrong, listen to what's going right, and then after they've spent a lot of time listening, hopefully say, now, how can I help? It's servant leadership that has been lost. It's not a policy necessarily, but servant leadership, which we see, fortunately, in some mayors around the country at that smaller scale, that can exist at the highest levels of the American federal government. And it's not, unfortunately, being something that we're demanding of them. If we do, I think we see a lot of good change come.
Hard for a broken democracy to fix a broken climate. We have to wrap it up. I'd like to invite you outside afterwards for a reception where John will be signing books out in the lounge. And also like to invite you to join our campaign. We have this Let's Talk Climate. We had Catherine Hayhoe, he was here remotely yesterday and said the best thing you can do about climate is to talk about it. So we have some of these cards out there, take a photo, tweet it, share it, and some people even write in there what you'd like to talk about climate. I have the pleasure and honor of sitting up here with these luminaries and others. It takes a whole crew to make this happen. I want to thank Adam and Ed and Josh and Justin, Kelly, Lena, Sarah Catherine, Spencer, Steve, and Tyler for making this possible. Let's give them a round of applause. We've been talking about the circular economy and how products can be designed using the wisdom of nature. John Lanier is co-author of Mid-Course Correction Revisited, the story and legacy of a radical industrialist and his quest for authentic change. Beth Rattner is executive director of the Biomimicry Institute, and Peter Templeton is CEO of the Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute. Podcasts of this and other Climate One shows are available wherever you podcast. I'm Greg Dalton. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time, everybody. Thank you.